For those who missed Pierre's brief introduction a few minutes ago, I'm Abby. I work with the World Habitat Awards team. So really looking forward to the discussion today. I think we have some great speakers joining us. So first off, I just want to welcome you all from the World Habitat Awards Network and from the European Endless and Homelessness Campaign. I think we may have some members join from the Housing Justice Network as well. So it's kind of we've combined a number of networks today, and so it's going to be great to hear different perspectives on that. I'd also like to welcome Christoph from UN Habitat and Xian from UNHCR, who's going to talk a bit more later on about their work in Odessa or in wider Ukraine. So to give you, I guess, some background on this, this is the first session of a 5-part series dedicated to the excellent work of our recent winners and their solutions to tackle some of the most urgent global housing crises that we see coming up. The session specifically is on housing for war refugees and those who are displaced. And I think, as Pierre mentioned, this is becoming a more and more pressing issue. And I think it particularly is, we're reminded of that this week with the anniversary of the Sudanese civil war. So I think this is the time where we need to hear from people who are working directly in this and hear about their solutions. And it's always reassuring to see what innovative and creative things people are coming up with. So thank you all for being here today. So our speakers will be METALAB from Ukraine, Newcastle City Council from the UK, and Public Works Studio from Lebanon. And then, as I said, we'll hear from Xian from UNHCR. A couple of things. The presenters will have about 15 minutes each to present. I'm going to use an emoji hand clapping reaction to mark that the time is up at 15 minutes. And if people cannot see that, then I will probably intervene via the mic. And I think that Marianne has always kind of started the chat as well. We really encourage people to introduce themselves, but also just to share any materials and ask any relevant questions. Please feel free to use the chat. We'll also have question portions throughout the session today after each presentation. So we're really hoping to generate kind of a wider discussion around this issue. So I'm going to stop talking and I will open up to our most recent World Habitat Award winner, which is METALAB from Ukraine. And they were awarded for their fantastic project, Kohati, which won the 2024 World Habitat Bronze Award. So we're going to hear from Anna on Kohati and the work that they're doing. So Anna, please feel free to go ahead and share your screen.
Hello, nice to meet you all, and happy to be part of this network and to share our experience. I am sharing my screen. Oh, I want to share our experience with the Kohati project, which actually turns out to become our housing program, affordable housing program in our organization. And I will explain today how we came up to this. And it's called Beyond Shelter because we started as a shelter response in the western part of Ukraine for internally displaced people. So who are we? We are the METALAB team. We call us City Development Laboratory. We started in 2018 as a city lab in a middle-sized city for doing different experimental public space, urban interventions and artistic interventions and research in the city to develop the conscious usage of the city and conscious citizens. And we were very well connected to the city government, and we had a really nice, and we have the nice environment of other activists around us, and we were acting in different fields, like from research to product design for the public spaces. But in 2022, in March, we had to respond to big amount of people coming up to the western part of Ukraine and looking for the accommodations and places to stay, and looking for the opportunity to accommodate even our friends But then we realized the bigger amount of the problem, the scale of the program. We started to look for any available spaces that we can renovate or adapt to the living. That's how Kohati project started. In Ukrainian, like to explain the word, the meaning of the name. In Ukrainian, hata is a hut, house, and ko is for co-living, and together Kohati means in Ukrainian to love. So we create this project, the Kohati, as a co-housing project for people who lost their houses in time of war. And we created with love and dignity for their residents. Oh, sorry. So we, as I said, we were looking for the empty buildings, and we came up to different types of dormitories, which were remaining like empty for last 10, 15 years. And we started like together with volunteers and our and also the potential like future residents, we started to make the renovation and bringing them to life. Our first pilot project was made totally on the donations from all our partners, friends from all over the world. It was the dormitory for around 100 people, and like that's how we started. During the like these 2 years, and like this is the map of our previous projects and our potential and future projects. So you see here that it's mainly in the western part of Ukraine, in Ivano-Frankivsk, Kamenets-Podilsky, and like we now start to develop new projects in Vinnytska Oblast, like more to the center. And during these 2 years, we had like we renovated 6 buildings, which were like in like different scale. And as you see here, they became remain mainly collective sites, which means they respond to the urgent needs of the housing, and they are temporal solutions for housing. They were mainly like dormitories or former educational facilities that were empty, and we made the like slight or even bigger renovation of them, and we yeah they were more in the dormitory typology. That means that people have shared facilities there, like kitchens or bathrooms and some shared spaces. But one of the example of these buildings was a private property, which was just like the owners just said that we don't need it, like we don't use it for now. You can do whatever you want there if it will help to the people who need it. It was a former kind of hotel or like a former living place near the industry. And we started to work with this object and actually like to find the model how we can run it. We rented it officially and became like the managers also of the housing project. That's how we analyzed, like after these 2 years, we analyzed our experience and realized that we had different types of kind of impact and ownership on these projects. Like mainly they were this renovational temporal solutions where we were initiating this, like we call it's like development phase, like we were initiating this process, finding resources for that, doing that, but then leaving and the city department or the owners of the building were operating this as a housing for the IDPs. We also had a phase where we were just kind of, it's volunteering and fixing, where we were jumping into the projects or into the buildings, doing some slight renovations or what was needed to make this place more livable. But after this, our first experience where we became the housing kind of housing provider or managers, we realized that this is the main, the most impactful from like project from our side, because like we observe and we monitor the communities we that live in this in all of our projects, and we realize that the most resilient and self-sufficient community is that in the place where we are the housing providers, because they like together with them we were looking for the opportunities for them to develop the space, to find the money to cover the utility costs, to develop the operational model, how it should be run, like how people can run this place by their own. And yeah, we see really nice results in terms of the community. So in our project, we try to work in different layers and directions, like to create the safe space for people who lost their houses. And first of all, we look for the like special comfortable opportunities for the residents. Like we try to equip comfortable rooms or like even micro flats, and we look for the spaces that can be shared and that are agreed to shared between the residents. We try to use the also participatory methods and approach to bring people into the decision-making process and to empower them, but also IDPs quite often, like in the beginning, they like we had a really big volunteering movement to create these places, and they were mainly from the IDPs. So the IDPs joined the process like from the very beginning, and then they have they feel more responsibility for this place where they stay to live, and they build connections in the new region, and that's how a lot of them become more socially integrated in the new area where they arrived. But also we try not to lose this sustainability approach, because we first of all, as we stay and like stay this and stick to the strategy to not to build from the scratch, but to retrofit the available properties. We in this way we already save like 50% of of all the resources, and we also try to reuse as much as possible together with the partners who donate us the materials from the building, from other building sites, or like from or like some furniture, not needed furniture, like from all over, like from the neighboring countries or like regions. And we are also looking for some sustainable models to operate such buildings, our housing. Here are several examples on how we do it. So it's about the reuse of the materials. So we try to reuse, as I say, as much as we can from the place, but also like what is left from the other sides. We also have a METALAB. We were developing the makerspace for a long time before the full-scale invasion. And we use this facility also as a place to integrate people, where people can, like if they're in Ivano-Frankivsk, can also come and produce their furniture or renovate something. But also there we produce, like give the opportunity for local people to and local entrepreneurs to produce some furniture to equip our spaces. And it looks then like this. We always care and like try to implement the shared facilities and shared spaces and bring them in the high quality that people want to gather around and use them. We also, yeah, as I said, invite people to co-design their shared spaces, like common yard or like room for kids or like or co-working. We also, yeah, that's about the process of creation, like and volunteering. That was about our first projects. So there were a lot of participation within the building sites, and it worked not only as a participation tour, but also as a therapy for a lot of people who needed just to be distracted from the news. We try to empower women, create inclusive, as much as we can, inclusive spaces for those, like in our housing. We also have, yeah, I think our team is quite resilient because they work like in all the conditions. We build a cross-sectoral partnership with the city governments, with international partners, and for now, together with UNHCR and Habitat for Humanity, we focus on the long-term solutions for social housing and affordable housing in Ukraine. With UNHCR, we developed the example of social housing based, like it will be municipal housing in Khmelnytsky and Vinnytska region, and where we also retrofit and the existing property, and where we bring where we, together with the city administration, create the roadmap of transforming this property into the real, like, social housing property. And with the Habitat for Humanity, we developed the first pilot project where it will be affordable housing, and where we, or maybe like some, yeah, for now, looks like we will be like a housing providers of this property. So that means we will rent it from the city and operate it for that many years that will be needed to then transfer it maybe to the city, or we are developing like this strategy based on the feasibility studies that we are doing now. So this is how, from being the organization providing shelter solutions, we transform slowly to affordable housing solutions in Ukraine.
Thank you so much, Anna. I'm going
That's
to come in on. I just want to say, one of the things that we were so impressed with when we received your project was just the speed in which you all mobilized to develop such a holistic program that was really focused on community participation, that empowerment. So it was just, it was an incredible project that we got to review last year, and really so deserving of the awards. So thank you so much for your work on it. I'm going to, before we kind of open the floor for a couple of questions, I think it'd be great to hear from Shyam from UNHCR and to hear about your experience working in Ukraine as well. And then I think we can see if people have a couple of questions.
Hello to everyone. I can't say good morning or good afternoon, but congratulations to Anna. It was very nice to see your project, and you're really far ahead of what we are doing here, and it's complementary to what we are still responding to on the east and the south of the country. So it was very nice to see METALAB's project, and congratulations once again. The Ukraine response, the humanitarian response, has been, again, a very unique and complex response. And what is impressive is that the huge capacity and apparatus that is available in the country itself. And one of the finest example was what Anna presented now. Unlike in other humanitarian responses that I have been involved in, a lot of the expertise had to come in from outside. Whereas in Ukraine, it is very special that a lot of this capacity was in country. And they all mobilized on their own, right from volunteers in the beginning to the local authorities and government, and they are still the ones who are providing the response here. And then I'll just share my screen with you now. So just in terms of geography, you can see how varied the responses by these colored dots. The blue ones are where there is immediate response for what do you call shelter needs. That is that as soon as there is some damage, they get some basic shelter materials. So that's what the blue dots are. And the green dots are the ones where other areas that were occupied that have been now retaken by the government, and populations are moving back to resettle. And these are the war-affected people who we are supporting with house repairs. So you can see those green dots, they are close to the contact line, but at the same time, they are areas in the east of the country, which I said earlier today is now the Golden Crescent. So you can see all those areas that were occupied but are now back and receiving help for reconstruction. They are the green dots. And then the red ones are the internally displaced people, which were spread out. They moved away from the conflict zone to safer parts of the country. So that gives you a kind of a picture on how varied it is, the response in different parts of the country in terms of geography. And as a last point, you'll see these blue dots also are spread out all over the country. And that's because the entire country is under aerial attack. And so these damages can occur in the east, north, or anywhere else in the country. So that's why you find them there. Let me see. And so the first part, when I said those blue dots were as soon as there is a shelling or a bombing, there is destruction to the target itself, or if they miss the target, they probably sometimes land in residential areas. And then in other cases, a lot of the blast wave affects a lot of houses and other buildings in the nearby vicinity. And here, usually, our UNHCR, not only as a shelter team, but with our other units, they provide some immediate relief in terms of materials to just secure their houses from further damage, and with counseling, help with some paperwork for them to go to the next phase of rehabilitating their building, or just sometimes even emergency cash. And the second part is when what is called war affected are people returning to those areas to resettle in their homes, sometimes partly damaged or sometimes totally damaged areas. And these repairs are mostly done through either contractors or through our other partners. And these damaged houses are identified with the help of our partners, and then we make these repairs. The primary concern is to secure the external envelope so that people can just move in, and especially in the winter months, to have a warm house. And there is also some people who also do a lot of self-help, and there are also community organizations which help with this rebuild, and then we just support them with construction materials or sometimes just cash so that they can do this reconstruction themselves. And in many cases, we found that there are a lot of people who move back, but they are unable to help themselves, or there's not enough sufficient help available to them. So we have had mobile teams, which are called mobile workshops, which will help them to use these materials, or even give them advice. Probably even they could borrow some tools that they need. So a lot of that self-help can be done with the help of these mobile workshops. and of course, if you, they're the two pictures at the top, they show you the different contexts that are involved. Some are rural areas, and a lot of it is also in urban areas. And the needs in the rural area and urban areas are vastly different, because in urban areas, they're more densely, what do you call, closely packed houses, or sometimes even multi-storied buildings. And then there's this, the third or last part of our program. No, sorry, this is a pilot project which was done last year for totally destroyed homes, which people would like to go back to their original housing site, a property that they own, and they would like to rebuild their houses, or they would like to live there. So this was a prefabricated home, which was installed on site of their totally destroyed project. So this was tried as a pilot project in Kyiv, in the surrounding areas around Kyiv. And there were over 100 of these were done last year. And this year we are planning to do another 300 of them. And then the last part is, again, connecting to what Anna introduced to us, was these are for people who are internally displaced, and they were living in collective centers, much like the buildings that Anna showed us, which was rehabilitated to accommodate them on a temporary basis. But now, keeping in with the new resolution, which was passed by the government, a lot of these people will be moved out from common collective centers and will move into more transitional temporary social housing, which is the end that we would like to see as a more permanent solution. And a part of the initiative to help them move out of this is to provide cash for rent support. And also there are a number of villages which have depopulated from earlier. As Anna mentioned, there were empty buildings, and similarly to empty buildings, there are also empty houses in many villages. So these houses, if they can be repaired, they can house IDPs who can't return to those areas because they're still occupied. So this was just the focus of all what we do on housing solution. So there are a few other things that we do on social infrastructure and other things, but then that's not kind of relevant to this party here.
Thank you so
yeah,
much, Shyam. I think that was a great kind of overview of all of the work that UNHCR does. So that was a perfect perfect kind of general summary. I think then with
sorry.
Oh, go ahead,
I have a
Alan.
question. Yeah. I was wondering how people with disabilities or other needs, special needs like that, are catered for in these emergencies that you've got.
Was that question to me?
Oh, either of you.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. No, what I can say is that we actively use disability inclusive initiative in all our programming. And for example, each of these, if I can start with, for example, individual house repairs, each of these houses are assessed by a team of engineers. And if there are specific requirements that need to be done for that particular house, that would be taken into consideration with those house repairs. That is one thing. And of course, the rental market initiative opens itself to better adaptation for this, because we can always find accommodation which is accommodated with houses that are suitable for access and other things. And I just got a note here which says that we found that a lot of people need help with installing the construction materials or right after damage. So that's why they get help with these mobile teams, which help them with the installation of materials. So that also supports them. I think these are just some of the few examples.
Yep.
And
Thanks.
I can add that it's like in our case, we try to equip the first, like the ground floors with the access and with the rooms and the bathrooms for disabled people. Like, unfortunately, like also budget-wise and also technical-wise, like it's complicated to do like in the high or even the three
Multi-story.
or like multi-story houses. But anyway, there is also the solutions, and like what we notice in our housing, that's also the residents, if there is a need, like they become the ones who kind of adapt to the new residents with the disabilities, and they help or exchange the rooms for those who like need it. So we try to respond to that, but also, as far as I know, for like with this new law that Shyam mentioned, it was there is the requirement for the centers for IDPs, like to be equipped with the shelter and to have
So
response to disability.
again, this is a gap that we identified, especially in multi-story buildings, where buildings that are affected by bombings or shelling, they get some compensation to repair their homes, but then the common areas are not covered by it. So we have identified that, and then we think that we could also introduce access to the buildings, multi-story buildings and common areas there. So this is a new thing that we'll try to implement from this year.
Yeah, terrific. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I'm gonna move us on in the interest of time to the UK now. So we're gonna hear from James Stewart, who's from Newcastle City Council, who won the 2020 Gold World Habitat Award for their incredible work in homelessness prevention. And he's gonna speak to us today about housing refugees, especially in an environment with a lot of housing scarcity right now. So we're really looking forward to what James has to say, and please feel free to share your screen.
Thanks, thank you. Yeah, okay, so I'll just try and share. Okay.
Perfect.
Is that better? Right, okay,
Yeah.
Eventually. Okay, sorry about that, everyone.
No worries.
Hi, first of all, thanks for the opportunity to come and talk to you this afternoon. So my name's James, and I'm a programme lead here at Newcastle City Council. So I'll talk a little bit about the work we do in terms of housing refugees in the context of housing scarcity here in the city. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Newcastle, it's a city in the north of England, here in the UK. And I'll talk a bit about our, I suppose, the design of our prevention system, how we try and increase the supply of accommodation to match demand, and all under the context of, I suppose, trying to prevent homelessness and having what we describe as a whole housing system approach, of which accommodation for people seeking asylum is one part, and a really important part. Okay, so a little bit about context and I suppose what we really mean by housing scarcity, and a lot of that is really trying to match demand and supply, and that's the mathematics really of more and more people needing support with housing, which is our demand, and not enough housing in which to accommodate people, which is our supply of accommodation. And in the context of a challenging economic background as well. And we do this as part of our role as a city of sanctuary in welcoming people who seek sanctuary in Newcastle, and housing being one element of how we as a city welcome people. But I think possibly the most important, because we can support people in terms of access to education, to employment, to skills, to training opportunities, to languages, and we can make Newcastle a safe place to live. But if people don't have a roof over their heads and a place that they can call home, then it's very difficult for them to think of the city as the home as well. In terms of the wider context and what we're seeing in Newcastle, to add to some of the challenges around the support that we can provide for refugees, it is a challenging context. We have a reduction in working age benefits, So that's a reduction in the social welfare support that's available to people, particularly people who are impacted by poverty, and that's a challenge for refugees as well. We've got a reduction in things like city council budgets, a reduction in Your Homes Newcastle stock, which is our council housing stock here in Newcastle, and that's decreased by 33% since 1996. A lot of that is around, I suppose, challenges in terms of things like right to buy, which give people a right to buy the property if they've been living in a council house for a certain period of time, but also challenges in terms of people moving on from council housing as well, so the cost of renting or buying a property for themselves, and all of that impacts on the flow of people through that whole housing system. We have an increasing number of asylum seekers in the city, and more people impacted by poverty. So, for example, more people dependent on food banks. So last year in Newcastle, our biggest food bank, the Newcastle Food Bank, fed or provided food to 62,000 people. So that kind of challenging context. But we have, I suppose, some reasons why we have some relative success in Newcastle. Part of that is around the size of the city. So we're a city with a population of approximately 300,000 people, which I think is probably about the optimum size for a city. It means that we can, where possible, try to understand people by name and to utilise some of those counting down approaches. Some of the reasons to be relatively optimistic and where we have relative success in Newcastle. So one is the number of children in temporary accommodation. So this might be homeless accommodation that's commissioned by local authorities. In many cities, that'll tend to be in hotels, and that's something in Newcastle that we've managed to avoid. But these statistics here look at Newcastle compared to other major cities in the UK. Obviously, Birmingham and Manchester, much bigger cities than Newcastle. But even if we look at the percentage of the population, we have a much fewer percentage of children in Newcastle in temporary accommodation. And we try really hard to avoid accommodating children in temporary accommodation, not just because of the misery that can bring. It can often mean that families are moving around different accommodation settings every 6 weeks or so, but also the cost as well. It's an extremely expensive way to try and respond to homelessness. So we see that relative success in terms of prevention and avoiding the need to accommodate families in temporary accommodation. And I suppose that that success is built around a system of prevention that's been iterative. So over the past 20 years or so, we've been building that design of prevention into that system. And that goes back to 2002, where we started to try and embed those multi-agency approaches to preventing homelessness, and then strengthening that during the context of austerity, reduction in government budgets, and also reductions in welfare benefits for people. Moving on to more personalised approaches to trying to develop bespoke multidisciplinary plans of support. And then more recently, moving on to that kind of citywide collaboration where we go from trying to prevent homelessness to trying to end homelessness. In terms of what that really looks like in that system, so we frame our prevention around interventions at that primary level, secondary and crisis as well. So in that primary space, that's where we try and raise awareness through advice, through web content, through bulletins, and developing policy initiatives as well. And our most impactful policy initiative is our policy of no evictions into homelessness. That's predominantly with our council housing stock, but we're now trying to extend that into registered social landlords as well. What that really means in practice is that when a household is in our council housing here in Newcastle, and that includes refugee households as well, is struggling to pay for their rent and is at risk of homelessness, that triggers discussion at our Sustaining Tenancies at Risk, or our STAR panel, where we try and connect that household to support that will help them to sustain that tenancy or find a tenancy that they will be able to stay in. So that kind of support includes things like debt advice if that household is struggling with debt, benefit maximisation, housing advice, but also links to health and social care as well. And ultimately what we're trying to do there is make sure that we're not punishing people simply because they don't have enough money to be able to pay for the rent. In that secondary space, that's a little bit more targeted. So for example, through benefit maximisation, making sure that people are receiving their full benefit entitlements. And again, that's part of our support offer for refugees and people seeking asylum in Newcastle. And we can see that last year, so through that work, nearly 23,000 residents in Newcastle were supported to secure nearly £23 million worth of benefit gains. That's financial gains. It's money that they're entitled to through the benefit system that they weren't previously claiming. And that's because the design of that system of benefit entitlements is quite complicated, and people will often need support and professional advice in order to make sure that they're receiving their full benefit entitlements. And part of that work around maximising income then helps to mitigate not just against the impact of poverty, but it reduces risks around homelessness as well. And then in that crisis space, that's where we try and learn. So when we haven't been able to prevent crisis, how we catch residents if they fail, but also how we learn from those presentations at a crisis point as well. So that's, I suppose, a bit about how that design works in practice, that focus on prevention. The challenges that we see at the minute are very much around demand, and as we try and manage demand and increase the supply of accommodation, and that's both for refugees, but also for everybody in Newcastle as part of that whole housing system approach. So what we have here in that kind of top table is looking at homeless relief cases, which are people who are eligible for homelessness support from ourselves as a city council. Looking at the first 3 quarters of 23-24, you can see a 58% increase there in cases from Q1 through to Q3. And then if we look specifically at the NAS accommodation, which is the National Asylum Support Accommodation, which is accommodation for people who are seeking asylum, we can see again those demand side pressures. So 475% increase in cases that required or that were required to leave asylum accommodation during that period. So that's that kind of demand side pressure that we're experiencing at the minute, in that context of housing scarcity, which is why we need to focus on, I suppose, the resources that we have and how we can increase supply of accommodation to try and meet that increase in demand. So in order for those things to work, we recognise that there needs to be that political leadership and resource allocation. And as that challenge of matching demand and supply grows, we also need to think about rights and standards and fairness and how we distribute that resource that we have in terms of our housing stock fairly across the city. And that requires compromise. So for example, it's about making sure that people have clear messages around what might be available and where we can reach that compromise to make sure that we are able to accommodate everyone in an approach that's fair for everyone as well. And those are difficult decisions, and they require that committed political leadership. But we are relatively fortunate in terms of the resource that we have, but also the political leadership that supports the allocation and the decisions that need to be made around how we allocate that resource in the region of 25,000 council homes, and then support that we buy in terms of supported housing rooms, dedicated move-on flats, and 365 days worth of outreach support, which is very much focused on that crisis end, trying to identify people who might be rough sleeping in the city and connecting them to offers of accommodation. So in terms of our work around supply and trying to increase that supply of accommodation, we have, I suppose, that kind of whole system approach. What we're really looking at here is that that flow through that system. So in that crisis space, some temporary accommodation, and that's a mixture of directly delivered accommodation that we own as a city council, and support that we're able to commission as well. In that kind of interim space, which is often described as headroom, it's our waiting room. And the bigger that queue gets in terms of demand, the larger waiting room that we need before people can move on to more permanent or social housing. So there's a lot of work that we focus on in terms of trying to increase the size of that waiting room for people who are waiting for longer term, more permanent social housing. But we can also see in that kind of last column there, some of those demand pressures and the reality of what that means in terms of the wait for permanent social housing, band A being the most high priority need for housing, so people at immediate or in immediate danger or at risk of serious harm, with the current average waiting time of 11 weeks for that permanent social housing. So some of those challenges, I'll not necessarily go through all of these and how we frame our responses as well. So part of the challenges around managing unpredictable demand, because we don't always know exactly what demand is going to look like across the coming weeks and months. So we have to react really quickly, but on a multi-agency level to try and respond to that demand. Part of the problem as well is around some of the hostile environment policies that impact on the community integration for people seeking asylum in our city, and some of those pressures around competing demands as well, and that housing demand often outstripping supply. But our responses are centred around our approach as a city of council, where we try and use our role as a local authority to bring people together, and that kind of convening power and that targeted work, not just around housing, but also making sure that people have access to other support in terms of access to education, to language classes, to health, to social care, and to opportunities for employment as well. But what we really try and focus on is that supply of accommodation, and we work in partnership to try and foster that kind of whole system environment and access to consistent information and having a shared narrative around individuals. And then I suppose really focusing on that supply of accommodation. So for example, we've attempted and been successful in increasing the supply of temporary dispersed accommodation, which is our waiting room accommodation. So we've just been able to add or get agreement to add an additional 60 properties that are currently void, empty within our housing stock, to increase that pathway of temporary dispersed accommodation. And that takes partnership working to kind of gather that evidence that try and matches demand to supply, and then also using capital funding streams like the Local Authority Housing Fund, which is a fund here in the UK that supports local government, local councils to obtain housing for people who are unable to find settled accommodation. And we have in the region of 25 properties acquired through that fund. So there's that constant focus on trying to increase the supply of accommodation.
James, I'm going to have to interrupt you soon, but I'll let you kind of wrap up.
Okay, yeah, I'll just finish with this one on our role as a city of sanctuary. And I suppose that housing context as part of that role as a city of sanctuary. So City of Sanctuary is a UK network of community groups, schools, universities, local councils, libraries, various different organisations, trying to work together to make sure that we're encouraging inclusivity, solidarity and compassion for people that are forced from a displaced background. And again, what we do in Newcastle in the context of housing is part of that role as a city of sanctuary. And again, that takes that kind of political leadership on issues that are affecting people seeking sanctuary, but also making sure that organisations in the city are working towards those shared goals and that we're building and funding targeted specialist services. And then we've got that work to ensure that approach continues as well. So I think that's probably just about the time up. So I'll just stop sharing the screen.
Thank you so much. I think it's incredible to see where you all began in 2002 and just the development of such like a holistic program that's now kind of, I think, well positioned to hopefully respond to that demand. I know it's incredibly challenging for you, but really a very well detailed and holistic program. So thank you for presenting on it.
Thank you.
I want to make the time for one question. Norweena, I see your question in the chat, which I'll probably leave to the end as it seems kind of more of a wider discussion point. But does anyone have any specific questions to James? I can take one before we move on.
Hi, everybody, and hi, James. Thanks very much for that. It's really helpful. I work in Westminster in the centre of London, and we're facing a very similar sort of situation with refugees who have just got status being turned out of hotels where they've been placed by the government at very, very short notice, and then obviously turning up at the homelessness services. One of the questions I had really, because Newcastle is well known to be an area where you've done lots of development work around housing and homelessness. And I'm just wondering about your neighbouring local authorities and your relationship with them and how you might work collaboratively on a sort of regional level, or whether there is any work on a regional level to share the sort of to share resources, I guess, particularly for people who are coming from overseas into your area. Is there anything you could say about the work that might be happening around that?
I could touch on it a little bit. Yeah, I think it's probably fair to say that there's more work that will need to be done. We have opportunities through things like the North of Tyne Combined Mayoral Authority as well, which might bring some additional scope for further work. In terms of that housing kind of supply at the minute, there hasn't been any regional agreement around kind of, anything like sharing some of that demand and matching demand to supply at a regional level. It's still very much done at a local authority level. But I think that's, I suppose, the sort of work we need to look towards in the future. One of the challenges that we see in an area like Newcastle is things like local connection, which continues to be a challenge. So about 50% of the people that we find who are sleeping in the city have no local connection to Newcastle, and that's where we build those relationships with neighbouring authorities. But I think more that we can maybe think about in terms of how we share some of that demand and supply pressure at a regional level as well.
All right. Well, now I'm gonna move on. We're gonna head to Lebanon, basically. But I'm going to introduce Christina, who's from Public Works Studio, and they are our 2021 Gold World Habitat Award winner. They won for their grassroots community reporting tool called Housing Monitor. And Public Works Studio is also a member of our Housing Justice Network, which advocates housing rights across 5 countries in the Middle East and North Africa. So we're very lucky to have you here today, Christina, and we're excited to learn more about Public Works Studio's experience with housing refugees and displaced communities. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So I'm gonna share my screen. So I'm Christina, a researcher in Public Works Studio, which is advocacy and research organization working on a number of public and urban issues in Lebanon. So I'm going to be presenting today the housing situation of war refugees and internally displaced people in Lebanon, and talking about how we can defend their housing rights. So starting with the Lebanese context, Lebanon hosts the highest per capita number of refugees in the world, including 1.5 million Syrians, 479,000 Palestinians, and more than 12,000 people from other countries. And Lebanon has a long history with migration waves and internal displacement, starting with Armenian refugees, Palestinians in 1948 and 1967, internally displaced people estimated to 2 million in the Lebanese civil war and an Israeli war in July 2006. Syrian refugees after the Syrian revolution, and most recently the Israeli war on Gaza and Lebanon displaced over 90,000 Lebanese individuals by April 2024. So in this presentation, we will examine the housing situation of war refugees and internally displaced people in Lebanon, along with the state's approach towards them, with a specific focus on Palestinian housing situation in camps and gatherings, housing conditions of Syrian refugees, and the fates of displaced residents due to current war. And finally, we will outline a path forward towards defending housing rights. So starting with the situation of Palestinian refugees, Lebanese authorities have systematically marginalized Palestinian refugees, subjecting them to economic, social, and political exclusion. Over the years, restrictive policies has confined Palestinians to overcrowded and decaying official camps and unofficial gatherings. And despite the significant increase of Palestinian population in Lebanon, the land allocated to these camps has remained unchanged since 1948. Additionally, since 2001, Lebanese law has barred Palestinian refugees from property ownership and inheritance while imposing restrictions on employment opportunities. And Lebanese authorities have further tightened control over Palestinian camps, installing high concrete walls, electronic gates, and army checkpoints, intensifying the residents' isolation. So all these conditions, combined with years of marginalization and neglect, have significantly impacted the camp's urban and environmental realities, leading to overcrowding and increased demand for housing amid restricted access to building materials, preventing the repair, expansion, and improvement of homes. Camp housing ranges from poorly ventilated units, lacking sunlight, to homes on the beachfront vulnerable to sea damage, and infrastructure inadequacies intensified due to the population density. So the current situation in the camps reflects a systemic failure on the part of Lebanese authorities and also international organizations to address the persistent plight of Palestinian refugees in Lebanon. As for the Syrian housing condition, we will focus here on the period between June 2022 and October 2023. So during this time, there has been an increase in political statements asserting that the armed conflict in Syria has ended and calling for Syrian refugees to return to Syria. So this political trend has been followed by policies pressuring Syrian refugees to return to their home country, increasing their legal insecurity in Lebanon. So in this context, Public Works has monitored and documented official policies, draft laws, statements, and security crackdowns, all forming a systematic endeavor to demonize the Syrian community. As we can see, this analysis was presented through a timeline summarizing housing threats reported by Syrians to the Housing Monitor alongside the notable events that took place during this period. The timeline showed discriminatory practices by various actors, including government agencies, ministries, local authorities, security forces, and even civilians. So also, as we can see in the timeline, the monitoring revealed a surge in reports of Housing Monitor to Syrian refugees after February 2023, coinciding with intensified political pressure for their return. So on the ground, these decisions led to violent raids carried out by municipality police and security agencies, both on homes or camps inhabited by refugees. And for example, on Friday, May 19th, 2023, a forced collective eviction of at least 70 Syrian refugees led by the governor of Beirut himself, with the support of the Beirut Municipality Guard Unit, took place in Barbir area in Beirut. Lebanese army also destroyed 6 shelter tents in the Bekaa region, and the widespread discriminatory campaign contributed to further aggravation of arbitrary evictions by Lebanese landowners. So in conclusion, increasing manifestation of discrimination, racism, and violence towards Syrian refugees, whether through unfair municipal decisions, citizen practices, or security force actions. So all these decisions and practices constituted a flagrant violation for human rights, denying refugees access to safe and adequate housing. As for the situation of internally displaced people, and since the outbreak of Israeli aggression on Palestine and Lebanon, southern Lebanese towns have experienced significant displacement due to the Israeli attacks, resulting in widespread devastation, loss of lives, destruction of homes and infrastructure, and harm to the environment and local economies, as we can see in the two maps documenting the Israeli attacks on Lebanon till January 2024. So, and although the Lebanese government approved an emergency plan in November 2023, a question arises regarding its implementation, funding, and effectiveness. The plan has several gaps, including an insufficient approach to providing just and adequate shelter, neglect of the rights and needs of individuals with disabilities and elderly, evident discrimination against non-Lebanese, and a lack of attention to addressing expected environmental and agricultural damage. For the housing conditions, presently approximately 84% of the internally displaced persons are residing in host settings, with 18% enduring overcrowded conditions. Meanwhile, 12% have opted for rental housing in safer areas. However, these areas have witnessed a surge in rent prices, with the absence of public authorities in addressing these challenges. Another 2% have relocated to their secondary residence, while only around 2% are accommodated in 18 collective shelters. So in light of the widespread denial of the war, the state is inadequately responding by failing to secure infrastructure for resilience and for people to continue living, whether in the targeted area or in the areas of displacement. So the Lebanese state's approach towards refugees and internally displaced people in Lebanon has led to Palestinian refugees being confined to overcrowded and decaying camps, Syrian refugees experiencing legal insecurity and discrimination, and the inadequate response to the challenges faced by the internally displaced people left them without adequate shelter and support. So in this context, the Housing Monitor, the project by Public Works, was developed as a community tool to protect and advance housing rights in Lebanon. It is used by residents to report on housing vulnerabilities and eviction threats. And in response, the Housing Monitor provides individualized legal and social services, including legal consultation and tips, mediation, negotiation, representation in court, external referrals, and assistance with filing claims and lawsuits, and also mobilize tenants around shared grievances and try to connect people in the same neighborhood for mutual support. And more specifically, in addressing housing conditions for refugees, Public Works focuses on advocacy efforts, documenting individual, but more importantly, mass and collective evictions of Syrian refugees in Lebanon. Complaints are reported to the Special Rapporteur on the right to housing to address concerns related to housing rights violation against Syrian refugees. And in cases such as the mass eviction of 70 Syrian residents in the Berbere area, complaints was presented to the municipality and efforts were made to fill a lawsuit. And regarding internally displaced people, efforts aim to highlight the state's responsibility to provide shelter and alternative housing and basic needs through research and documentation, serving as an advocacy tool to shed the lights on the responsibilities for emergency response. And additionally, annual reports of the Housing Monitor are presented to international agencies to put international pressure on the Lebanese state to address local problems effectively. So documentation and reporting are also crucial due to the lack of sufficient data in Lebanon. And also the produced knowledge is utilized to draft propositions for a reform agenda promoting the right to housing. So in Lebanon, policy making and fragmented legislation concerning access to housing marked the reality of its social and urban landscape, characterized by informality, dilapidated social housing, vacant buildings, gentrified neighborhoods, insecure tenancy, and rising homelessness, with a significant portion of the population residing in poor housing conditions. So a holistic approach addressing housing issue from a perspective of social and urban justice is now crucial. So Public Works is also developing a proposal for a comprehensive right to housing law through participatory means, aiming to ensure affordability, inclusivity, social and economic equity, and spatial justice, and acknowledging the diverse need of various social groups. So in conclusion, as we reflect on the housing plight of 4 refugees and internally displaced persons in Lebanon, it is also imperative that we not only acknowledge their challenges, but also shed the light on the critical need for a comprehensive policy addressing the right to housing. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Christina. I think one of your comments about data scarcity, I just think that the work that Housing Monitor and organizations in Beirut are doing right now to build up that information and that data so precisely so they can hold authorities accountable to these kind of horrific violations is so important. So thank you for laying out that context. It's really important work that you're doing. So I actually have a question. Oh, Christoph, I see you unmuted, so you can feel free to go ahead. No, it would be great. It would be great if you want to, but
no, but thank you. But I have no. I mean, I'm always impressed by like all the presentation and like the diversity from the partners. It's always like very interesting. So thank you very much, World Habitat, for organizing. So I'm discovering like a few projects. So there are. And it's always an inspiration also for us, for our work. So so thank you for that. And thank you very much to all the presenters for...
Yeah, not to you. Thank you, Christoph. I really appreciate it.
Yes. It was to link the presentation from Christina and with the previous one from Ukraine and asking if you think Christina or have tried similar activities like METALAB is doing with investing empty buildings or possibility, because you mentioned there's a lot of vacant buildings in Lebanon, if this has been tried or what hinders this to happen, to use empty buildings, public or private or abandoned ones, to create more participatory and decent accommodation for refugees.
So for now, no, we didn't try similar practices with refugees. We have a lot of problems in Lebanon. So for example, we have also the problem of building collapse. in many regions in Lebanon. So with that, we are trying to map vacant buildings and public lands in Tripoli with a committee there. So we can maybe try to do similar practices, but it's not related to refugees. It's more related to the building collapse problem in Tripoli in specific. So yeah. And it's still in the preliminary stages. So we are still doing the mapping with local field workers in Tripoli.
Okay, I'll go ahead. Christine, I'm curious about the civil society landscape in Beirut. Do you find that you have Public Works Studio has a lot of collaborations with people also working in terms of trying to raise awareness around the plight of Syrian refugees and Palestinian refugees? Is there quite a strong civil society fabric working on these issues?
So there are many organizations working on this specifically, and also there is media coverage for this issue. But mainly the amount of discriminatory practices now happening in Lebanon is people are not really involved in a positive way with everything happening with Syrian refugees. So this is what's happening now.
All right. Are there any other comments or questions before I conclude? Dom, go ahead.
Yeah, just well, first of all, say thank you to all the presenters and to World Habitat. A really interesting session. And Christine, I just wanted to ask you about the relationship. Obviously, there's a lot of the issues that you're talking about are I guess, the responsibility of national government within Lebanon. But I'm just wondering what the relationship might be with more local political leaders. So is there any scope for a more positive local response within cities or areas where you've got a more conducive political environment from local political leaders at all?
We have some parliamentarians which are like our allies. So in some aspects, we try to have a good relationship with them and work on advocacy, especially for the right to housing law that we are working on, so they can adopt the law, this law. But on a local level, we mainly try to fill complaints to municipalities and raise awareness and media coverage. But as an allies on local levels, the situation is very hard. So even the municipalities are filling decisions against the Syrian refugees in order to evict them on maybe mass evictions and sometimes individual evictions. The situation is very complicated, especially now we have some accidents and yeah.
Thank you so much, everyone. If there are no further questions, I'm going to just provide a little bit of information. So obviously, it was great that we could all gather here today. If you're interested in connecting with anyone or you have any further questions, please feel free to email any of the World Habitat staff members. And also you can use our LinkedIn page for the World Habitat Awards Network and have any conversations on there as well. We are also going to have, I believe, another session is on July 2nd, on energy saving retrofit housing, and that will be the second session in this series. So look out for the invitations via email in the coming weeks.